Everyone laughed at the homeless man's drawing, until an art gallery paid $50,000 for it. The sidewalk outside the Metropolitan Museum of Art was bustling with tourists and art enthusiasts on a crisp October morning in New York City. Among the crowd, sitting cross-legged on a piece of cardboard with a small collection of drawings spread before him, was Vincent Moreau, a homeless man in his 50s whose weathered hands moved with surprising grace across a sheet of paper. Vincent had been living on the streets for 3 years, ever since a combination of mental health struggles and financial ruin had cost him his apartment in Brooklyn. What most people didn't know as they hurried past his makeshift gallery was that Vincent had once been a promising art student at the prestigious Parsons School of Design, before life's circumstances had derailed his dreams. Every day Vincent, who would position himself near the museum's entrance, not to beg for money, but to draw. He sketched the faces of passers-by, captured the architectural details of the buildings around him, and created intricate portraits that seemed to breathe with life. His tools were simple: pencils he found or bought with spare change, paper, scraps from dumpsters, and an old eraser worn down to almost nothing. Most people ignored Vincent entirely, stepping around him as if he were just another piece of urban furniture. Others would glance at his work with mild curiosity before moving. But some would stop, point, and laugh, not with appreciation, but with derision. They saw a homeless man playing at being an artist, creating what they assumed was amateur work to earn sympathy and spare change. "Look at this guy," one wealthy businessman said to his companion, loud enough for Vincent to hear. "Thinks he's the next Picasso. These street people will try anything for a handout." Vincent had learned to ignore such comments, focusing instead on his art. Drawing was more than just a way to pass time. It was his connection to who he used to be, his proof that despite his circumstances, he was still capable of creating beauty in the world. On this particular morning, Vincent was working on something special, a portrait he had been developing over several weeks. It was a drawing of a young girl he had seen regularly in the area, the daughter of a museum security guard who sometimes brought her to work during school holidays. The girl, maybe 8 years old, had a face that captured Vincent's artistic imagination, expressive eyes that held both innocence and wisdom, a smile that seemed to light up everything around her. The drawing was executed with remarkable skill. Vincent had captured not just the girl's physical features, but something deeper: her spirit, her joy, the way she seemed to see wonder in everything around her. The shading was masterful, the proportions perfect, and there was an emotional depth to the work that spoke of genuine artistic talent. As Vincent put the finishing touches on the portrait, a small crowd began to gather. Unlike the usual dismissive glances, these people seemed genuinely intrigued by what they were seeing. The drawing was undeniably beautiful, created with a level of skill that was impossible to ignore. "That's incredible," whispered a young woman with an art school bag slung over her shoulder. "The technique is amazing." But her companion, a pretentious-looking man in an expensive suit, scoffed loudly. "Please, it's just copying from a photograph. Any street artist can do realistic drawings. There's no real artistry here, no vision. It's just technical skill without substance." Others in the growing crowd began to murmur agreement, their initial appreciation turning to skepticism. The man's confident dismissal seemed to give them permission to view Vincent's work as less impressive than they had first thought. "He's right," said another observer. "It's just photorealistic copying. Real art requires more than just being able to draw what you see." Vincent felt the familiar sting of rejection, but he continued working, adding subtle details that brought even more life to the portrait. He had heard these criticisms before: the art world's tendency to dismiss technical skill as somehow less valuable than conceptual innovation. What none of them knew was that Vincent wasn't copying from a photograph. He was drawing entirely from memory, capturing not just the girl's appearance, but his emotional response to her presence in his life. Every line, every shadow, every highlight was filtered through his artistic vision and years of training that most of them couldn't even recognize. As the crowd dispersed, most people shaking their heads and muttering about street art and homeless scams, Vincent carefully placed the completed portrait among his other drawings. He had learned not to expect much from the public's reaction to his work, but the dismissal still stung. These people saw his circumstances before they saw his art, and their prejudices colored everything else. What Vincent didn't notice was that one person had remained behind, watching him with intense interest. Dr. Elena Rodriguez was the curator of contemporary art at a prestigious gallery in Soho, and she had been walking to a meeting at the Met when she had been drawn to the commotion around Vincent's work. Unlike the others, Dr. Rodriguez had the trained eye of someone who had spent 20 years in the art world. She could see immediately that Vincent's work was extraordinary, not just technically proficient, but emotionally resonant in a way that spoke of genuine artistic vision. The portrait of the young girl was particularly striking, capturing something ineffable about childhood and hope that most artists spent their entire careers trying to achieve. Dr. Rodriguez approached Vincent carefully, not wanting to startle him or make him feel like he was being scrutinized. "Excuse me," she said gently, "I couldn't help but notice your work. It's really quite remarkable." Vincent looked up, surprised by the genuine appreciation in her voice. Most people who stopped to talk to him were either dismissive or condescending, but this woman seemed different. "Thank you," Vincent replied quietly. "I don't get many compliments. May I ask about your training? Your technique suggests formal education." Vincent hesitated, unsure whether to share his story. "I studied at Parsons, many years ago, before things went wrong." Dr. Rodriguez nodded, understanding that there was likely a complex story behind Vincent's current circumstances. "Your work shows it. The portrait especially, there's something about it that goes beyond technical skill. You've captured something essential about your subject." "She's a special kid," Vincent said, his voice softening. "Her father works security at the museum. She has this way of looking at the world like everything is magical. I wanted to capture that feeling." Dr. Rodriguez studied the portrait more closely, noting the subtle ways Vincent had used light and shadow to convey emotion, the careful attention to details that revealed character rather than just appearance. This wasn't the work of a street artist copying photographs. This was the work of someone with genuine artistic vision. "Vincent," she said, having introduced herself and learned his name, "I run a gallery in Soho. We specialize in discovering and promoting exceptional artists who might not have traditional representation. Would you be interested in showing me more of your work?" Vincent stared at her in disbelief. "You want to see more of my drawings?" "I want to see everything you have, and I want to talk to you about the possibility of including your work in an upcoming exhibition." Vincent's hands began to shake as he gathered his drawings. It had been so long since anyone in the art world had taken him seriously, so long since he had dared to hope that his work might be seen as more than just the desperate scribbling of a homeless man. Dr. Rodriguez spent the next hour looking through Vincent's portfolio, dozens of drawings that revealed not just technical mastery, but a unique artistic voice that had been shaped by his experiences on the streets. There were portraits of other homeless individuals that captured their dignity and humanity, urban landscapes that found beauty in decay and abandonment, and studies of light and shadow that showed a deep understanding of classical artistic principles. "Vincent, this is extraordinary work," Dr. Rodriguez said finally. "You have a gift that deserves to be shared with the world." "But I'm homeless," Vincent said, as if this fact disqualified him from being considered a real artist. "I don't have a studio, or proper materials, or any of the things that real artists have." "Real artists create art," Dr. Rodriguez replied firmly. "Everything else is just logistics, and logistics can be solved." She explained that her gallery had a program for supporting emerging artists, providing studio space, materials, and exhibition opportunities for those who showed exceptional promise. Vincent's work, she believed, was exactly what the program was designed to support. "There's something I need to tell you," Dr. Rodriguez continued. "That portrait of the young girl, it's museum quality. I've seen work in major collections that doesn't have the emotional impact of what you've created here." Vincent felt tears welling up in his eyes. For 3 years he had continued to draw not because anyone appreciated his work, but because it was the only way he could maintain his connection to who he used to be. Now, suddenly, someone was not only seeing his art, but recognizing its value. "What happens now?" Vincent asked, hardly daring to believe that his life might be about to change. "Now," Dr. Rodriguez said with a smile, "we get you off the streets and back into the art world where you belong." Within a week, Vincent's life had been transformed in ways he could barely comprehend. Dr. Rodriguez had arranged for him to stay in a small studio apartment above her gallery, complete with proper art supplies and workspace. For the first time, in 3 years, Vincent had a bed, a shower, and a place to create art without worrying about weather or harassment from police. The transition wasn't easy. Vincent had developed habits and coping mechanisms during his time on the streets that were hard to shake. He found himself hoarding food, sleeping on the floor instead of the bed, and feeling anxious when he couldn't see the exit from any room. But slowly, with Dr. Rodriguez's patient support, he began to readjust to indoor living. More importantly, Vincent began to create art with an intensity and focus he hadn't felt since his student days. Having proper materials, quality paper, a full set of pencils, good erasers, and adequate lighting allowed him to push his work to new levels. The portrait of the young girl, which Dr. Rodriguez had carefully preserved and framed, became the centerpiece of his growing portfolio. "I want to include this piece in our next major exhibition," Dr. Rodriguez told Vincent as they reviewed his recent work. "It deserves to be seen by serious collectors and critics." Vincent felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. What if people react the way they did on the street? What if they can't see past where I came from? "Vincent, the art world can be pretentious and elitist, but it also recognizes genuine talent when it's presented properly. Your work speaks for itself." Dr. Rodriguez had been strategically building buzz around Vincent's work, showing pieces to select collectors and critics without initially revealing his background. The response had been overwhelmingly positive. People were drawn to the emotional depth and technical mastery of his drawings, praising them as examples of contemporary realism at its finest. The exhibition, titled Hidden Voices, Art from the Margins, was scheduled to open in 6 weeks. Vincent would be featured alongside several other artists, whose work challenged conventional notions about who could be considered a serious artist. His portrait of the young girl would be prominently displayed, with an asking price that Dr. Rodriguez had set at $15,000, a significant sum that reflected her confidence in the work's value. $15,000, Vincent repeated in amazement when she told him the price. For one drawing. Vincent, I've sold lesser works for much more. Your technique is flawless, your vision is unique, and your story adds another layer of meaning to the work. This piece deserves to be in a major collection. As the exhibition opening approached, Vincent found himself torn between excitement and terror. Part of him was thrilled at the prospect of having his work displayed in a real gallery, of being taken seriously as an artist again, but another part of him feared the judgment and potential rejection that might come when people learned about his background. Dr. Rodriguez had been honest with him about the challenges they might face. Some people will focus on your homelessness rather than your art, she warned. They'll either dismiss your work as a novelty or over-romanticize it as outsider art. We need to be prepared for both reactions. But she also believed that Vincent's work was strong enough to transcend those prejudices. Great art has the power to change how people see the world, she told him. Your drawings don't just show technical skill. They show a perspective that can only come from someone who has experienced life from the margins. That's not a weakness, it's a strength. The night before the exhibition opening, Vincent stood in the gallery looking at his work displayed on the walls. The portrait of the young girl was beautifully lit and professionally framed, surrounded by his other drawings in a presentation that made them look like they belonged in a museum. How do you feel? Dr. Rodriguez asked, joining him in front of the portrait, terrified. Vincent admitted, but also grateful. 3 months ago, I was sleeping on cardboard, and people were laughing at my work. Now it's hanging in a gallery with a price tag that's more money than I've seen in years. You earned this, Vincent. Your talent, your persistence, your refusal to give up on your art, even when everything else fell apart. That's what brought you here. Vincent nodded, still struggling to believe that his life had changed so dramatically. Tomorrow night, art collectors, critics, and enthusiasts would gather to view his work. Some might still see him as just a homeless man playing at being an artist, but others might see what Dr. Rodriguez saw, a genuine artist whose work deserved recognition and respect. Whatever happens tomorrow, Vincent said quietly, thank you for seeing something in my work that I had almost stopped believing was there. I didn't see something that wasn't already there, Dr. Rodriguez replied. I just helped you remember what you had never really lost. The opening night of Hidden Voices, Art from the Margins, drew a sophisticated crowd of art collectors, critics, and enthusiasts. Vincent, wearing a suit that Dr. Rodriguez had helped him select, stood nervously near his displayed works, watching as people moved through the gallery with wine glasses and serious expressions. The initial reactions to his work were mixed, just as Dr. Rodriguez had predicted. Some visitors were clearly impressed by the technical quality of his drawings, stopping to examine the intricate details and masterful shading. Others seemed more interested in the novelty of his story than in the art itself, treating him like a curiosity rather than a serious artist. So you're the homeless artist everyone's talking about, said one well-dressed woman, approaching Vincent with a kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. How fascinating. Tell me, do you think your experiences on the street have made your art more authentic? Vincent had prepared for questions like this, but they still made him uncomfortable. I think my experiences have given me a different perspective, he replied carefully. But I hope people will judge my work on its own merits, not just on my background. The woman nodded absently, already moving on to the next piece, clearly more interested in being able to say she had met the homeless artist than in actually engaging with his work. But not everyone reacted that way. Vincent watched as a distinguished older man spent nearly 20 minutes studying the portrait of the young girl, moving closer and farther away, examining it from different angles with the intense focus of someone who truly understood art. Excuse me, the man said, approaching Vincent. Are you the artist who created this portrait? Vincent nodded, bracing himself for another condescending comment about his circumstances. I'm Robert Chen, the man continued, extending his hand. I'm a collector, and I have to tell you, this is one of the most moving pieces I've seen in years. The way you've captured not just the child's appearance, but her essence, her spirit, it's extraordinary. Vincent felt a surge of relief and gratitude. Thank you. That means a great deal to me. I'm curious about your technique, the way you've handled the light, the subtle gradations in the shading. It reminds me of the old masters, but with a contemporary sensibility. Where did you study? For the next hour, Vincent found himself in the kind of serious artistic discussion he hadn't had in years. Robert Chen was genuinely interested in his work, asking thoughtful questions about his process, his influences, and his artistic vision. It was the kind of conversation that reminded Vincent why he had fallen in love with art in the first place. I'd like to purchase this piece, Robert Chen said finally, gesturing toward the portrait. But I have to warn you, I'm not interested in it because of your story. I'm interested in it because it's exceptional art. Vincent felt tears welling up in his eyes. That's exactly why I'd want you to have it. As the evening progressed, more serious collectors began to take notice of Vincent's work. Word spread through the gallery that the portrait had been sold, and suddenly people were looking at his other pieces with renewed interest. By the end of the night, Vincent had sold 3 more drawings, including a powerful portrait of an elderly, homeless woman that captured both her dignity and her pain. But the real surprise came the next morning when Dr. Rodriguez called Vincent with news that would change everything. "Vincent, you need to sit down," she said, her voice barely containing her excitement. "I just got off the phone with the Whitney Museum. They want to acquire the portrait for their permanent collection." Vincent felt the world spin around him. The Whitney Museum, but Robert Chen already bought it. He's donating it to the museum. Apparently he was so moved by the piece that he wants to ensure it will be seen by as many people as possible. And Vincent, they're offering $50,000 for the acquisition. Vincent couldn't speak. $50,000 was more money than he had ever imagined his art could be worth. It was enough to secure his future, to rent a proper studio to, buy quality materials, to focus on his art without worrying about basic survival. "There's more," Dr. Rodriguez continued. "The acquisition has generated significant media attention. Art critics are calling your work a major discovery, and several other museums have expressed interest in your pieces." Vincent sat in stunned silence, trying to process what this meant. 3 months ago, people had been laughing at his drawings on the sidewalk. Now one of the most prestigious museums in the country wanted to add his work to their permanent collection. "Vincent, are you there?" "I'm here," he said quietly. "I just... I can't believe this is really happening." "Believe it," Dr. Rodriguez said firmly. "Your talent has been recognized at the highest levels of the art world. This is just the beginning." The news of the Whitney Museum's acquisition of Vincent's portrait spread through the art world like wildfire. Within days, Vincent found himself at the center of a media storm that he was completely unprepared for. Art critics who had never heard of him were writing lengthy analyses of his work, journalists were requesting interviews, and collectors were calling the gallery asking about his available pieces. "Moreau's Portrait of Hope represents a return to the humanistic tradition in contemporary art," wrote one prominent critic in Art News. "His technical mastery, combined with his unique perspective, creates work that is both aesthetically beautiful and emotionally profound." Vincent struggled to adjust to his sudden fame. After years of being invisible on the streets, the constant attention was overwhelming. Photographers wanted to document his story, reporters wanted to interview him about his experiences, and art world insiders wanted to meet the homeless artist who had taken the establishment by storm. "I don't know how to handle all this," Vincent confided to Dr. Rodriguez during one of their regular meetings. "People are treating me like some kind of celebrity, but I'm still the same person who was sleeping on cardboard 6 months ago." "Not the same person," Dr. Rodriguez replied gently. "You've grown, evolved, reclaimed parts of yourself that you thought were lost. But I understand that the attention can be overwhelming." She had been helping Vincent navigate the complexities of his new status in the art world, advising him on which opportunities to pursue and which to decline. There were gallery owners offering him shows, collectors wanting to commission work, and even a publisher interested in creating a book about his art and story. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. Vincent received a letter from his former professor at Parsons, Dr. Margaret Sullivan, who had seen the news coverage of his success. "Dear Vincent," the letter read, "I remember you as one of my most promising students, and I was heartbroken when you disappeared from the program. Seeing your work in the Whitney and reading about your journey has filled me with both sadness for what you endured and joy for what you've achieved. Your art has matured in ways that formal education alone could never have provided. You have found your voice as an artist, and it is magnificent." Vincent wept when he read the letter, remembering the young man who had once sat in Dr. Sullivan's classes. Full of dreams and ambitions that had seemed so attainable then, that young man could never have created the work he was producing now, work that was informed by suffering, loss, and the kind of hard-won wisdom that only comes from experiencing life at its most challenging. The success had also allowed Vincent to reconnect with parts of his past that he had thought were lost forever. He had been able to contact his sister in California, whom he hadn't spoken to in 5 years, and explain what had happened to him and how his life had changed. "I thought you were dead," she had sobbed during their first phone call. "I tried to find you, but you had just vanished." Vincent was planning to visit her soon, to rebuild the family relationships that his homelessness had severed. The money from the Whitney acquisition had given him not just financial security, but the emotional stability to reconnect with the people he had lost. But success also brought new challenges. Vincent found himself struggling with imposter syndrome, wondering if he truly deserved the recognition he was receiving, or if it was just a novelty that would fade when the art world moved on to the next story. "I keep waiting for someone to realize that I'm a fraud," he told Dr. Rodriguez during one of their sessions. "That I'm just a homeless man who got lucky." "Vincent, look at your work," she replied, gesturing to the drawings that covered the walls of his studio. "Look at the technical skill, the emotional depth, the unique perspective. This isn't luck, this is talent that has been refined by experience and dedication." She was right, Vincent knew. His work had evolved significantly since his days on the street, but not because his circumstances had changed, because he had never stopped creating, never stopped pushing himself to improve, never stopped believing that art mattered even when no one else seemed to care. The portrait that had started it all, the drawing of the young girl that now hung in the Whitney Museum, had become a symbol of hope and resilience for many people. Vincent received letters from other homeless individuals who had seen the news coverage and felt inspired to pursue their own dreams, from struggling artists who had been ready to give up, and from people who had simply been moved by the story of someone who had refused to let circumstances define their worth. Your art has given people permission to see beauty and dignity in places they had learned to overlook, Dr. Rodriguez observed. That's the mark of truly important work. Vincent was beginning to understand that his success wasn't just about his individual achievement, it was about challenging assumptions, breaking down barriers, and proving that talent and vision could emerge from the most unexpected places. 2 years after his first gallery exhibition, Vincent Morrow stood in his own studio, a spacious, light-filled room in Brooklyn that he had purchased with the proceeds from his art sales. The walls were covered with his latest works, including a series of large-scale drawings that explored themes of displacement, resilience, and hope. His upcoming solo exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art was generating significant anticipation in the art world. The transformation in Vincent's life had been complete, but he had never forgotten where he came from. He had established a foundation that provided art supplies and instruction to homeless individuals. Believing that creativity could be a pathway to healing and self-discovery for others who found themselves in circumstances similar to his own. Art saved my life, Vincent often said when speaking to groups about his experience. Not because it made me famous or wealthy, but because it reminded me that I was still human, still capable of creating beauty even in the darkest circumstances. The young girl from his famous portrait, now 10 years old, had become a regular visitor to his studio. Her father, the museum security guard, had become one of Vincent's closest friends, and the girl herself had developed a passion for art that Vincent was nurturing through informal lessons. "Mr. Vincent," she said during one of her visits, "why did you draw me that day?" Vincent smiled, remembering the moment when he had first seen her face and felt compelled to capture her spirit on paper. "Because you reminded me that there was still beauty and joy in the world, even when I had forgotten how to see it." The portrait that had launched his career now hung in the Whitney's contemporary collection, viewed by thousands of visitors each year. Many people stopped to read the placard that told Vincent's story, learning about the homeless man whose work had challenged their assumptions about art and artists. Vincent had also reconnected with many of the people who had dismissed his work during his days on the street. Some had reached out to apologize, embarrassed by their earlier judgments. Others had simply pretended that their previous encounters had never happened. Vincent bore no grudges. He understood that people's perceptions were shaped by their own experiences and limitations. The art world can be cruel and elitist, Vincent reflected during an interview with a major art magazine, but it can also be transformative and redemptive. My work found its audience not because I was homeless, but because it spoke to something universal about the human experience. His success had also inspired changes in how galleries and museums approached the work of marginalized artists. Several institutions had created programs specifically designed to identify and support talented artists who might not have traditional access to the art world. Dr. Rodriguez, who had become not just Vincent's dealer but one of his closest friends, often marveled at the journey they had taken together. "When I first saw your work on that sidewalk," she told him, "I knew it was special, but I never imagined it would have this kind of impact." Vincent's story had become a powerful reminder that talent and vision could emerge from anywhere, that society's most vulnerable members might also be its most insightful observers, and that art had the power to transform not just individual lives but entire communities. Understanding of worth and dignity. The man who had once been laughed at for his amateur drawings now had work in major museum collections, commanded high prices from serious collectors, and was recognized as one of the most important contemporary realist artists of his generation. But perhaps more importantly, he had reclaimed his identity as an artist and his sense of purpose in the world. "People ask me if I'm angry about the years I spent on the street," Vincent said during his MoMA exhibition opening, surrounded by art world luminaries who hung on his every word. "But I'm not angry. Those years taught me things about resilience, about seeing beauty in unexpected places, about the dignity of all human beings, lessons that inform every piece I create." His latest series, Invisible America, featured portraits of homeless individuals from across the country, each one rendered with the same technical mastery and emotional depth that had made his original portrait famous. The series was already being hailed as a masterpiece of contemporary social realism. Vincent's story reminds us that genius can emerge from the most unlikely circumstances, that society's judgments about worth and value are often wrong, and that persistence in the face of dismissal and hardship can ultimately lead to recognition and success. Most importantly, it shows us that everyone deserves to be seen, heard, and valued for their unique contributions to the world. His journey from homeless man to celebrated artist proves that talent doesn't discriminate based on circumstances, that creativity can flourish even in the harshest conditions, and that sometimes the most profound art comes from those who have experienced life at its most challenging. If this story inspired you and reminded you to look beyond surface appearances, to see the potential in everyone you meet, please subscribe to our channel. We share stories of triumph, transformation, and the incredible power of human resilience and creativity. Hit that subscribe button and join our community of people who believe that everyone has something valuable to offer the world, and that sometimes the most extraordinary discoveries are hiding in the most ordinary places.